huge thank you to the library for allowing us to do that. Because this is an exhibition that I've wanted to do for a very long time, ever since I saw Nick Sharratt talking about the influences on his work. And he showed the 3 picture books that he had loved as a child. And quite frankly, if you boiled them up and then brought out the residue, you would see Nick's style. And I thought, this is just so interesting and fascinating. So a huge thank you. And I should also say a massive thank you to my colleague, Lucy Dukes, who is sitting at the back, and wonderful Caitlin, who is known as wonderful Caitlin, for allowing, well, I went and said, I've got this idea, and they said yes. And the library have been beyond helpful. I mean, Jenny has been truly miraculous. And Ruby Rose was balanced on a stool, defying all health and safety. So it's just brilliant to be here. And thank you all so much for coming. And yeah, so we're going to be talking about how picture books actually stay with you all of your life. And we have, of course, wonderful Sara Ogilvie. How many people here know her amazing book about Dogs Don't Do Ballet? I have to say, we lived and died, Dogs Don't Do Ballet. And Debbie on my right, every time you go to a book bug session, you see a book bug. It's like child, your child.
You can just say who was the mother. They can never tell.
So it's really brilliant. And I'm going to keep an eye on the time, I hope. My watch has taken rather irritatingly to suddenly stopping. So I might need Jen to flag me down. But I want to leave 10 minutes at the end for questions. But anyways, let's start. And we've got the exhibition out there, which is, I think, I'm just so pleased with it. And you will notice that the top level is the books that are the influences. Then we have the piece of original artwork, some of which was quite late in arriving, not from my 2 compatriots here, but from other people. And then at the bottom, we have examples of the existing work that all these amazing illustrators have created. So it was really interesting. I rang Sara and I rang Debbie, or I emailed them and various other people and said, supposing I was going to ask you what books really were important to you when you were little, and people just fell down the phone, or the emails came back with a list of, one list included 53 books. And I said, I'm really sorry, but we can't actually manage 53. So just to start with, how easy was it to choose 3 books?
Oh, it was a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. I think in the end, I decided to pick books that were definitely from a particular era. So all the books that I picked are from the 1970s. So that was when I got given them. Most of them I was given. And they kind of resonated with me in some kind of way. So my books are The Little Worm book by Janet and Alan Alford. And that kind of caught my attention at primary school. I think we had a book club and we had this magazine, and I remember we could pick certain books from the magazine up here with money every year. And I remember just seeing the cover of that, and I just thought it just looked brilliant. The idea of how many different things a worm could be. So I don't know if people know that book at all, but it even has worms having delusions in the book. So some worms think that they're cadets. And other worms are sort of so vain that they look into mirrors and the sort of trapdoors where they get trapped underneath. So it's a master class in all possibilities of everything worm. And then the other book that I chose was Fungus the Bogeyman, which was given to me as a Christmas present. And that still stands the test of time. That's the sort of golden standard, I think, of just absolute creativity and imagination and genius. In not just in picture books, but in panel storytelling. And the fact that it's, I wonder if that would be published now, because it's got a certain melancholy about it. But I just absolutely adored all the little sides and all the descriptions, and just the day-to-day craziness of this sort of underworld. And then the other book that I chose was illustrated by Tommy Ungar, and that's really important. It was actually Flat Stanley by Jeff Brown. But particularly with Tommy Ungar's illustrations, because I actually think that book made me excited about illustration and the possibilities of what you could do with illustration and humor. So I absolutely loved it in that one. So those were my. I could go on about them for ages, but that's not in a nutshell.
What was fascinating was because I saw some of the longer lists, and it was fascinating how many books turned up in different people's lists. What about you, Debbie? Your three.
Yeah,
I was amazed that you managed to get it down to three.
oh, it was no competition, really.
Yeah.
I actually did find it quite easy, partly because I have the books in my studio because they are, kind of really precious to me. I do have a lot of those in my studio. It's an unbelievable tip. But so the books from my own childhood are fairly few and far between. So yeah, it was they all have a sort of emotional, or I have an emotional connection to all of them. And they all, like you, came from a particular period, because I'm way older than you, it was 1960s, and I was gifted them by my parents when I was small. And with one of them, King Cup Cottage, which was published by Medici in paperback. I don't think it was ever in hardback. I put a few Medici paperbacks when I was little, and all of them kind of stuck in my head. They were slightly sentimental Victorian type watercolor illustrations, but wonderful in their way by an illustrator called Racy Helps. What a fabulous name! My God. Oh, so good. But what stuck for me was I can remember sitting in my cot reading, well, not reading because I couldn't read, but reading the pictures in King Cup Cottage. And the picture that I asked Viv and Lucy to display in the case was one of Francesca the Frog, who was issued invites to her birthday party and nobody shows up. And she has baked up a storm and she's made loads and loads of jellies, and she sits there and her jellies are delicatessen. And she just sits there and she kind of half-heartedly eats a bun that has flies in it, because that's what frogs, bake. And just all of those details, plus the picture of Francesca as a baby tadpole behind her, all of that, I could remember that all my life. And I must have been 2.5 when I saw that book. And I carried that image in my head all the way through to art college. And one morning I was posting something at our local post office in a little village called Gifford. And back then the post office used to, God knows why, sell Medici paperbacks in a sort of metal rotating stand. And I thought, oh, I wonder if that book is there, and it was. So that was like 30 years, that picture. Oh no, actually I exaggerated, I was 25, so 23 years, that picture stuck in my head. So that for me is the power of picture books. The other two books were sort of compendiums. One was an absolutely exquisite Paul Hamlin collection of fairy tales illustrated by a Czechoslovakian illustrator whose name I'm not even going to attempt because I would just not do it justice, but they were of a particular dreamy, exquisite quality that there is really, I could work out how they were done. Even now, I don't know how the unpronounceable but genius illustrator managed to make those pictures, but they are absolutely exquisite, really, really beautiful. And it was in that era where you got about 10 colour plates to a book that thick. Imagine that now. That wouldn't fly. Trying to get that through acquisitions, I get it. And the other book was a Golden Treasury, a very American book. And I think that kicks off my absolute love of American illustration, because it was full of just like the best American illustrators ever. Lots of little stories, lots of little poems, but all gathered together in such a magical form. And my brain is gone. I can't remember the illustrator, but I can remember the illustrator illustrated, it will come to me. No, it was.
Oh my God, help me out. Can you remember who it was? It was, Margaret Wise Brown was the author,
Yes.
and it was the same guy that illustrated Charlotte's Web.
Come on, I know this. Garth Williams.
Yes, it was Garth Williams. Well,
Just
absolutely beautiful, beautiful line illustrations with one single colour wash in the background. And, you know, there were so many good illustrations in that book. So again, I was very small when I was given that, and I just adored it. Absolutely wonderful.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because, I mean, I'm older than both of you, probably almost as old as both of you put together. But I was brought up, I was lucky in that I had access to a lot of books with pictures. I don't think picture books as such were really around when I was little. But books was, and I was given an awful lot of books that belonged to my parents and that were very Victorian, with beautiful illustrations, really lovely. And then I was 7 and I was put on a train to go to Cheltenham, and I was given a book, and it was the Rose Fairy book, and the illustrations were about a Russian emigre illustrator called Vera Bock, and it's in there, and the illustrations were so different. They were, and even now, just thinking about it, I get a little thrill at the back of my neck, and that, just like you were saying, that's just stayed with me for years and years and years. And I just went through looking at the pictures over and over and over again. And and then the other 2 books, there's a Margaret Tarrant book, which I look at now and think, ooh, you know, those are the kind of books that I have a lot of, very realistic narrative illustrations, rather soupy stories where children did noble deeds. I had a lot of that. And then, but I did at the time think that the pictures were really magical. And then the third one was my mother's book when she was growing up, and it's called The Dawn Child, and I've never met anybody yet that has ever come across it. But the pictures in that are superb. The author illustrator was called Beryl Irving, and she was at the Slade, and the book was published in 1919, so she was pretty early at the Slade. And you'll see if you go and have a look. And the colour palette is all orange and browns and greens, and there's just such a magic to it, and it just took me completely away from where I was. It stayed with me. So what in particular do you think, is there any particular thing that you took from those books that you feel has influenced your style, or what was it that was particularly, I mean,
Well, that's a question.
yeah, I mean, looking at the bears in the book, I mean, I could see a Debbie kind of look, not quite look alike at all, but there's a sort of ethos, as it were, a smell.
I think, I suppose what those books gave me was the secret life of animals, the fact that animals could have, you know, portraits of themselves on the wall as tadpoles, or, you know, could have a whole life that we knew absolutely nothing about. I think they just really expanded my consciousness. I don't know. I'm not sufficiently far enough away from my own work to be able to be analytical, unfortunately, because you know, yeah, I'm kind of enmeshed in it, so I'm totally incapable of being objective. Really sorry.
It's a really hard one. I think it's often the external observer. I mean, if you look at James Mayhew's work in the exhibition and the books that he loved as a child, the colour palette is absolutely dead rare. I mean, you look at the 3 books and then you look at James's work, and there it is. And then you look down at some of his other current books and you think, well, look, there it is again. What about you? Is there anything?
Well, it was interesting. I didn't think about it, but I started to think about it after I'd chosen the books. And then when I was kind of having a look, I was looking at the one book, and I was looking at the cover of Gotham, and I thought, there's that worm. That's the worm. The worm is there. And that worm features quite a lot. I think there's something about the little creatures that are kind of sometimes a little aside So when I think about some of my other favourites that couldn't feature, because we had to whittle it down to three, you've got Richard Scarry and then Lowly Worm. And there's something about little critters and little creatures that are just doing the story, the narrative's carrying on. But then there's little asides, and you know, you can spot those. And I think I've always enjoyed the detail. And I think that comes back to the Fondness of the Bogeyman, you know, Rayner Briggs, the master, at all the details and all the extra readings that you get when you visit the book and reread. And I think that's really stayed with me, it influenced me as well, about things you spot with the rereads. I get excited by that, especially obviously for the non-reader, the child, getting to know the book, but then something new that wasn't seen. It's just, so, and with the Black Stanley book by Tommy Ungar, I'm a big fan of Tommy Ungar's work anyway. And I think it's just, there's a sort of wicked wit, I think, that I picked up on. I didn't really know what that was, but I realised that the line was doing something that was kind of resonating with me. Even the way that there's a great illustration in Flat Stanley where Stanley, who has been flattened by a pinboard in the night, is just, you know, nonchalantly rolled up by his father and carried around like a sort of rolled up rug. And his little brothers would be jealous, his little brother Arthur's would be jealous. And of course that all comes through in the language and the text. But the way that Tommy Ungar has chosen to illustrate certain parts just elevates the humour so much. And I realised at that point that the pictures were doing something really special alongside the text. And I think that's the first time I really kind of thought about it, which is interesting.
Because there's an enormous humour, because you both have a lot of humour in your work. And I was looking at the books that you chose and just trying to see whether that was a kind of a sort of visual humour that's there.
I don't know with you, but I'm not just thinking about the child it was for, I'm also thinking about the parent, and hopefully, if there's any, it's going to read it more than once, possibly several times, and because I will also try and put something in there, some adult humour in there, just to lighten their load slightly.
Yeah, and I always think that the best picture books, or the ones that I love best perhaps, are the ones that have a complete world, and it is that creation of the world. I mean, we both do that so brilliantly. And was that something that you think might have come from books that you read when you were? I mean, has the world got a world?
Well, the worm, it's just very in depth. It's like multiple worms as well. It's the world of worms. But yes, you know, they're all different shapes, sizes, colours, viciousness, benign.
Vicious worm.
Yeah, there's some very vicious vampiric worms. So it's almost exhausting one topic. And I think with that particular book, I did a series of chapter books a few years ago with a writer called Andy Shepherd, and the series was called Boy Who Blew Dragons. The sixth book was a guide, it's the ultimate guide to blowing dragons. And I think it's only now I realise that one book has definitely kind of infiltrated into that world of dragons, so it's like exhausting things to read the topic, but in as many creative and interesting ways as possible. So I think it is all in there, it's all filtering through. I didn't really think about it that kind of intensity until you invited us to pick some books.
Well, I always think, I don't know whether you agree, but I always think the one's the last person to notice something that's happening in one's own work. And so, you go and do these talks, and suddenly the audience says, I noticed such and such, and you say, really? And then you go away and think about it, and you think, oh yeah, actually they were right. And one feels vaguely surprised.
Yeah, but they're coming to the beginner's mind. You've been looking at it, all the way through 32 pages.
Yeah.
32 sets of marks, and several failures along the way, and changes. yes, but not in the David Gliori sense. Yeah, but I mean, sort of being sort of immersed in a world of your own making is one of the best bits of this job. God, I love it. I really do enjoy it so much. It's just sort of imagining. I'm sort of doing something at the moment with a cat who's a doctor. I'm just imagining her home life when she's not actually being a GP. It's just such fun. I do have to rein myself in, you know. Remember, it's her children. She's not allowed to lie in the bath with large glasses single malt. Real husky milk. But anyway, it's good fun.
I used to read Francesca's story to my children, and we always used to cry bitterly at the end. But, well, not at the end, but when she's left, without anybody coming to visit. But I wondered whether, because there's such a warmth and kind of family feeling, and you're no matter what, and all those books. I mean, I can see that there's a thread coming through.
Yes, real emotions.
Yes.
Because the children, as we know, feel emotions even more bigger and more keenly than we do, because you know we've had to dull down in order to survive. But for children, you know, sort of losing a toy is the end of all things. It truly is. And you know, sort of tackling big emotions, picture books is the best place to do it.
And picture books deal with such strong, and it's like Grandpa, John Burnham's Grandpa, he deals with death. And I do wonder, I mean, of the books that you've chosen, how many of them do you think would be still published these days?
I think Fungus the Boogeyman would be a struggle one. I think it's, I mean, from my experience in, obviously, you know, I've been making picture books for about 15 years now, which is not that long, but it feels quite long. But I think just the, you know, the melancholy in it. I mean, what I can relate to is thinking about a book that I did for Dave, the Lonely Monster, with the writer Anna Kemp, and I think there's maybe a touch of Fungus in that character. But he was lonely, and there was lots of conversations about that book cover, because they kept saying he's meant to be, you know, he's meant to be lonely. I kept getting told, you make him a bit happier, and it's like, it's a lonely monster. You can't be sitting there waiting. All these other things. But I think that's kind of where we are sometimes, where things always have to be sort of lightened up and brightened up, and it's truly quite exciting when you get a book that has got, it is dealing with these sort of issues. And you know, I think Michael Rosen's Sad Book is a really great example of something that is really, you know, important to show to children, because we, you know, we have to deal with the difficult things in life as well.
It is quite interesting though, because if you're dumb enough like me to read your own reviews, sometimes parents must take absolute exception to the fact you have them told how it is, because they want to smuggle their children in this world that would be absolutely lovely if it existed, but sadly doesn't. I'm not, you know, sort of one for absolute realism, but I do think that if Lucky Bunnies have tempered with a little bit of box in the background, otherwise, you know, I think we're doing our children great disservice. But you know, like you have to argue that fairly cogently.
Yeah, I do think that, I mean, looking back, because I mean, I first started publishing over 30 years ago. And I think that the books that, I think, I do feel that there were books then that did allow those emotions to come through more strongly in some ways. I do think, I mean, I'm kind of conscious now, I keep being told, oh, we just want jolly books, we want feisty books, we want feisty characters, but that's too, your text is too quiet.
Be honest with Spotty mouth strikes again. No, absolutely not. I mean, I'm still churning out. Well, not churning out, but I'm still making books that aren't dealing with big stuff.
Yeah.
Like I have done with the war in the afternoon, and you know, to not seems like a real disservice. I'm not forcing the book on children, but I know that some teachers find it incredibly helpful, and as we are surrounded by our televisions telling us all the various wars and calamities around the world, children are curious, they're going to ask, and if there's no answer, or if it's talked about in hushed tones, or if it's swept under the carpet, that's not right. And I did do that with a lost story, and I remember there's a page in that I can't actually get past that. Harrowing. So, yeah, but it's probably not going to sell very many copies, but I'm very, very glad I did it. So,
There's so many, I mean, so many of the smaller publishers have now been swallowed up, haven't they, by the larger ones? And so, I mean, it's great that you can still go on publishing those books. I mean, they should be published. It's really, really important. But I mean, because you get text, and do you find that the texts are lighter weight now than they were? Or
I sometimes get offered texts that I feel are too light. I try some down, because I just think there's enough books in the world that are like that. And I think there's always a sort of risk of publishers maybe seeing something successful and thinking, we want a bit of that, or we want a bit more of that, rather than thinking, what isn't there? What should be in the gaps, And I think I'm more interested in that kind of thing. I'm not really wanting to fall into a copycat trap. I think that can happen. I mean, in fact, just going back to Mr. Bobby, he essentially has an existential crisis about his life, his job, his world, wondering what it all means. I absolutely love that about reading books. He's always questioning, he's always kind of self-reflecting. And I just think, that is so important.
it's like where the wind blows.
Oh, fantastic. That middle spread.
Yes.
It's just the point of
Yes. Do you think that would be published now?
I think from an artist of the stature and round the race, I think he could probably. It is about.
Yeah.
But also at the end of his last book, was Time for the Light Side. I think that was a really brave. All his books deal with aspects of his life, like his parents and everything. It's just absolutely brilliant because it's so real and important.
I heard somebody in a school just recently a teacher saying, I'm not sure that we need quite so many picture books because all these children get visual stimulation from screens. How are we doing? Yes, thank you. I'm glad that there's that response. Obviously, excellent audience. What would your response be? I mean, why do children need picture? I mean, I know what the answer is, and you know what the answer is. But I mean, one of those rhetorical questions that interviewers ask: do children need picture books as much now that there is so much available on screens? Discuss.
They probably need it more than ever. I think there's so many aspects of a picture book that the very fact that it's shared, the very fact that two people sit close together and the page turn, you can't. It's a physical thing, it's an experience. There's anticipation, there's excitement, there's kind of, and then sort of shutting it and going back and looking at it again. It's just a completely different kind of tactile experience. And also, I think screens speed things up and everybody's got a bit of attention, overload and sort of attention spans get short. And I think, books slow things down, make people kind of ponder over and reflect on what's happening. And there's so many different aspects to a book that are better for mental health.
Amen to all of that. Also, neurologically, I do think that the ability to have that close and deep and quiet focus that a book can engender is an antidote to the rush and the instant sort of in your face sort of screen activity. When we access pictures and screens, we don't linger over them, we graze, and we have this kind of shallow connection with the imagery and actually the stuff that we consume on the screens. It just doesn't actually stick to the sides. It's there's sort of something about working on a screen that turns your consciousness into a Teflon coated sort of shoot, you know, it goes in and goes straight like that again. Whereas with a book, you know, you can turn back for one thing, you can have a look at what you may have glossed over because you really want to get to the page turn, or that there are little things to discover all the way through a book that you can, if you're reading with a small child, you may see them, or they may spot them and you may not. And you know that there's that whole conversation that is going on, as well as what's actually happening in the picture book. And in the world that we live in today, yes, we need more picture books, not less. I do remember turning up at school down in Englandshire some years ago, and for a visit I was supposed to be doing, and the teacher said, "Oh no, we can't actually have an auto visit just now because it's literacy hour." I think I'm not going to throw shade on teachers. I think they're doing a hard job at the moment, and I think possibly what we heard was a very ill-considered remark. I sincerely hope it was for the sake of children and our education system.
Well, she did have to summon me at break time, telling her a lot about books. But she did say that maybe they would get some more picture books.
Good work.
But I mean, are there picture books that are coming out now that you think will have the same influence on children in the future? That if you had to name any, are there any that you particularly would think of?
That's really tough. First, there's a lot of really good picture books out there that are, you know, I think in terms of just memorable books, I think something like Chris Haughton is making some really stunning picture books. He's got a great understanding of colour and just, you know, the rhythm. And I think there's an awful lot of books that are just getting bashed out, which is really frightening. You know, I hate to say it, but the celebrity books, some of those just you just feel like you're seeing the same people over and over again. Just if it's like tweet. But you know, now and again was quite a special book. There's a book. Is it called The Cafe at the Edge of the Woods by Mikey Please, is it? I don't know if I've got that right, but I think, you know, you see some books coming out and you think, feels really different.
Yeah.
It's like quite special. And it's, I think that book in particular is a bit of recognition and rightly so. So what we need more original, interesting books. It's coming back to that thing about the gaps.
Yes, absolutely. I used to review the book Guardian and picture books in particular. And so I used to get sent vast quantities of books, and the number of books that I was sent about siblings, and he was a new baby, and the new baby is very unhappy until the older sibling makes it laugh. And it got to the stage where I was just praying for somebody to write a picture book about a new baby where the sibling comes in and puts a pillow over its head. Honestly, truly, every batch of books, I can promise you, there were always a minimum of 2 on that particular subject.
Oh dear, I've written one.
But yours is different. And this is what I'm always saying to students, is that, you know, there are all these stories, but it's the way that they're told, and it's the ones that I got were the ones with just, you know, where the old sibling just looks over the cot and the baby smiles and the end happy ever after.
But then you also got Edward Gorey's The Bad Baby. Does anyone know that?
Oh yes. Oh yes. Yes. Yes.
Oh, for sure.
I don't, yes. Because one of the things, again, when I was considering that, people choosing books that influenced, were there any books that you had when you were little that you hated or that you were terribly scared of?
Yes. The Ladybird book, Billy Looks Gruff, anybody? The Ladybird, the troll under the book.
Yeah. That was.
The illustration of that troll. So many people I've met, and if you say that, you talk about nightmares, they go, yes, the troll. There's one particular picture where you see it for the first time, so under the roots. And you're just, I used to flick over that page really quickly. I couldn't handle it, it was too much. It's terrible.
Did you suffer from the troll in the Billy Goat Gruff?
I certainly didn't like it. There was an Irish, it was, it was some Irish legend about a changeling child. And I remember the illustrations of that, and changeling baby was absolutely horrific. And yet, Sendak did something similar, many, many years later. And this ice thing that only stares is actually very beautiful in a sort of otherworldly way. It's the same story more or less, but certainly this Irish one. But I have to say that I think the Ladybird trolls and this Irish group, I can't remember the name of, suffered from the fact the illustrators were not in this quality. So when they did a horror, it really was on so many levels, a total horror.
It's interesting though, at the same time, it's sort of a slight enjoyment, even really funny.
Yeah.
Because that's the other thing that sometimes causes. It's like, like a character looks too funny, it's like getting the sweet spot. Especially when things go to meetings and they get discussed, it's like, there's something of the badness in this character or whatever. It's just like, sometimes you just need a bad character.
Oh, yes. Really, yeah, because you need the evil to make the good good. I mean, if there isn't any evil, the good is just really boring.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We had when I was little, we had a collection of it was a Victorian book. It was very big, and it had the Nutcracker and the rats in the Nutcracker. And I mean, in fact, in the end, it was locked away because I had nightmares 3 nights running every time I looked at it. At the same time, I really wanted to go back and look at it. And the rats, and they were dripping blood, and they had fangs.
Yeah, dear.
Have you?
Subject close to my heart. Not the direct fans, but the rats.
Rats in the Nutcracker.
Sadly, no, it's real life, but anyway.
Oh, I was trying to think which of your books you had rats in. So the picture books can work both ways, in fact. Yes. One of my daughters always had to have the chicken licking. She was terrified by the end of chicken licking with the box. And we had to actually glue 2 pages together. So, I mean, picture books are I mean, how, one of the things next year, I think, is what's it called, the year of reading or something? Yeah, and how can people, it's the grown-ups, isn't it, who need to really be, I mean, people keep talking about how can we get children reading. Seems to me that it's how do we get adults reading? Because if adults read, then children will read, because there's nothing. So how are we going to get adults buying more children picture books and reading them to children?
That's a very good question. Barbary. No, I think, well, I suppose in terms of what we do, it's just making sure that this book's coming out that we get excited about and that we want to buy for the children and share. I mean, I don't know, I do worry a little bit about some sort of initiatives about picture books and festivals and things sort of getting dwindled down, and so how do people get them into their hands when bookshops are closing as well and things are going more online? So it's that ongoing battle bit. So I don't know if I have the answer to that question.
Yeah, what do you think?
I think for children to really become avid readers, it really helps if we see that behaviour demonstrated by their parents. at home. And I think short of engendering a massive solar flare that takes out all our phones simultaneously, yes, bring it! We have to find some way of getting adults back to reading. I think adults have possibly fallen off their, like adults that did read, and I think have become fewer and further between because of the lure of screens. I mean, when you go out in the street, there's so many people just captivated by these things. They're walking, looking at their screens. Like the minute there's a moment in their lives where they're not actually doing something else, out comes the screen and they're on it. I don't know what the hell we do about them. I can only assume, because I think it's been proven over and over again, that if you spend so much time on a screen, your attention span is short from hell. So you've got a very, very short attention span. And I think this is a long shot, but it's possible that comics might do it. Comics for adults, dear God, what am I saying? But sort of zines are quite popular. It's a way of getting information across and just sort of getting people, because there is a lot to read in some comics. That might be a way back for adults to fall back in love with reading, and then that will have a trickle-down effect. But at the moment, it's dire. It is very dire.
What's interesting though, when I was walking here, I was walking up Victoria Street, and of course the Elephant House Cafe, which used to be nearby, is now there. And the amount of people, that the JP Roll thing, it's funny how there's a certain corner of the market, it's just enormous, it's like a mushroom cloud. And then at the same time, we've also got books that are very nostalgic, like Into Tea, always it's grown. It's just, I always think, how do you create the space for all those other amazing books and to get into people's hands?
It is interesting, isn't it? Because when I was very little, there weren't children's picture books as such. There were books and they had pictures, and they were very, very beautiful pictures. And then picture books came in, and there was the glory days of the 80s and the 90s when there were these fantastic picture books that were coming out, and the 2000s. And now there's this massive rise in kind of illustrated graphic novels and things like that. So maybe you're right that maybe adults, because there is also this tendency, isn't there, to assume that picture books are only for little kids. I mean, how many times have we heard adults in bookshops going, "Oh, you're too old for that," and they're not. I mean, I don't think anybody is ever too old for a picture book, or possibly for one or two that I can think of. But yes, but I shall not mention. So, if you could have chosen one more book from your three, what would you have chosen?
On top of the three.
On top of the three.
I think I probably would have chosen Thorn Rose by Errol McCain.
Oh, yes.
He was an animator as well as an illustrator. Unfortunately, died very young. But I've never seen illustrations quite like his. They're incredibly detailed. They're almost like tapestries. They're so sort of luscious and amazing, and the perspective's fantastic. If you don't know Errol McCain, please do what his work. It's always never-ending spiral staircases with princesses sort of ascending to them and put their finger on a spinning wheel. But then there's an amazing image in Thorn Rose of all the spinning wheels getting thrown on the fire and burnt, because of course the witch is going to constantly she'll be sleeping. Oh, it's amazing, and just the detail in it. And there's a brilliant image of the kitchen where everyone's gone to sleep as the hedge grows. And the mice are asleep and the cats are asleep and chasing the mice. Again, it's that detail. Everything, even the flagstones on the floor, are incredibly executed. So that would have been my other choice.
He's extraordinary.
Brilliant. Absolutely.
What about you, Debbie?
I've been sitting here in that cold sweat. I will pick myself all the way from to like when you stupid woman, you know, there was this, there was that, there was the other. But can I cheat?
Yes.
And I say the book I most wish I'd been a child when I came out and I had it as a child. It's where the wild things are. Because that's just the work of absolute until genius. To take a tantrum and turn it into that is, God, I love that book so much. Senda was extraordinary. He really was.
I was working at the, what was then called the National Book League, and then turned into Book Trust. And I was working in the information library when that book came through as this country paperback. And the number of complaints that we had from librarians and parents saying it's far too scary, children will be terrified, it should be taken off all the children's bookshelves. And I mean, I just thought, and that was the point at which I thought I'm going to give up working as a very inefficient person in this library and go and see if I can work in books. I mean, it was quite phenomenal.
Those monsters are just adorable. They are, I mean, you know, like he's trying to conjure the most awful things imaginable, and it's like, oh my God, is that really the worst you've got? Bless you, little boy. It's just such a lovely book. And the fact that something was waiting and it was hot. Oh, talk about safety.
Did you know that Sendak had to fight tooth and nail because the publishers said, because Originate said, and his supper was still, well, the publishers wanted to say his supper was still warm. And I mean, it just does not sound good to me. It just doesn't work. And his supper was still warm.
I think the other thing that's so special about that book that I've never really seen it done as well by anybody since is just the design of it in terms of the growing image and how it fills and becomes little beads, double spread, and then it shrinks back to it. It's done. It's incredible. It's a masterclass.
You know, and I don't think there's anybody here who was at PCA when I was tutoring there, but they used to go, oh no, we're going to get Bibs to talk about where the wild things are. Because it's miraculous. I mean, and it's so clever the way it just takes you in. It's so theatrical. I mean, I do think that picture books are like little mini theatres. It's like that page turn. That's the moment at which, you know, pa-doing, somebody pops out.
I always say that if I'm talking to children about a picture book, and I say this is the first end paper, and this is like the road where the curtain goes up on the stage, and the actors haven't actually come onto it, and you're trying to work out what's going to happen. I'm just looking at the films, you see the march, the backdrop, and whatever.
Yes.
It's setting the scene. It's
Yes.
great. Picture books are, you know, of course I'm going to say the business, but they are.
The magic. I mean, that's why Lucy and I started picture books, and why we've got the exhibition out there. I mean, everybody here go away and just raise the flag for picture books, and that I'm just conscious of the fact that even with my rather inaccurate watch, which I don't think has stopped, I did promise that I would leave 10 minutes for questions. I don't know whether there are any questions, because if there aren't, we can just keep chatting. But is there anybody who's got a question that they want to ask? Is anybody? Yes, there's somebody there. Can you be very kind and shout loudly and clearly?
Sure. Artistically speaking, I was wondering who was your influences when you began, and who are your influences now, and what have you seen that changed in your style from then to now?
I mean, I would certainly say that one of the big choices, Tony Imber's work has been a huge influence on me. It's not always illustration, though. Of course, it's all things really. It can be, you know, paintings and sculptures and films. But yes, I'm a big fan of people who find the extraordinary in the ordinary. So when I think about some people that are excellent doing that, people like David Haughton in terms of his draftsmanship, and also artists like Edward Burke from about the sort of 1920s, 30s, as well, drawing just scenes of real life and, you know, somebody eating a sandwich in a cafe and the sort of meat kind of hanging out. It's like little observational things I think are really inspiring. So people that just find a fascination with curiosity in the real world. So that can be illustrated into sculptures. Yeah.
I sort of discovered the Albergs when I was at art college, mainly because I started the art college with a small baby, and so as he grew, I was reading to him. Oh my goodness, everything Dana Alberg did, I absolutely adored. So I unashamedly said, influence me, give me all you got. So yeah, I am still sort of holding a candle for that woman. Her attention to detail and her sort of kindness really in her pictures. They were just like, the humor is very, very gentle, but it's never sentimental. It's just absolutely spot on, and her draftsmanship was peerless. And also that Mark Morris and from Maurice or whatever, because you know, I don't even need to really give him research. He was pretty damn good. I still absolutely love them. Now, many years on, I'm sort of kind of holding a candle for Chris Haughton. I love what he's doing with shapes and movement, and it looks simple, but he's distilled so much into these images. And I will never be able to work like him, but I am a huge admirer.
I think what's interesting about his choice is it's Leone.
Yes.
And, you know, I think you can really see that coming through in his own unique way in his work, but the way he's cutting out shapes. And, you know,
Yeah, I thought exactly that, yes. I mean, it's really worth studying the books and just seeing. I mean, it's like I was saying earlier, James's colour palette has come through, and I think Nick Sharratt as well. You can see that, and they're all so different. And Ken Wilson Max, I perhaps should mention, he said that when he was growing up, he didn't really have access to picture books, so that these are books that he took when he was about 10 or 11, when he really saw them and thought, aha, this is what I want to do. Is there anybody else who's got a question? There's a hand there, yes.
Yeah. I'm kind of intrigued about a lot of the stuff you've been talking about tonight is the vintage illustration style, which is very detailed. The artists were very focused on things like form and colour and texture and replicating that in a kind of realistic way. Whereas now there's a prevalence towards simplified form and more expressive textural work. And I'm just wondering, do you feel, because I work in a very realistic way, but I feel like there's a pressure on me to simplify things down for picture books now, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on the way that styles have changed.
Yes, I mean, I know exactly where you're coming from, because you know, working with picture books, and also I still go into ECA, and then but I also work with a lot of different publishers. And yes, you're right. And very often they'll say, oh, it's too narrative, or it's not our style. I think it swings and roundabouts myself, and the pendulum goes doing across, and then it comes back again. And I mean, people like Benedict Blathwaite still is doing very, very detailed work, and is still being published. And there are publishers. They are maybe not the mainline publishers, but there are people that you can seek out who are still willing to take, you know, who love that kind of style illustration. And it's like saying that you could only wear clothes from Marks and Spencer's to children. I mean, you need the full gamut, don't you, the full range. So you need the detail, the narrative, and then you need extremely minimal whatever.
Yeah, I think you have to be careful or not. You know, be true to yourself.
Yes.
Because, you know, and don't follow trends. I think if you just kind of focus on where you want to go with your work and express yourself. These things are always in flux and changing, and I just think, you know, you could be in danger of kind of swinging all over the place stylistically, and you know, I just think following trends is a little bit of a trap.
It's be a trendsetter. Yes. As long as it's got movement and it's got warmth and it's got continuity, so character.
And it came from you, it came
Yes.
from your particular unique viewpoint. If it feels good to you to do it, then that is what you should be doing. Trying to squeeze yourself into another box so that, you know, you can be published or whatever, it's a mug's game. So I mean, you're absolutely right, be true to yourself.
That's so important. I mean, very often students say, what style should I be trying? I mean, you know, your style, the style that's inside you. I'm aware that we started a little bit late, so it's right if I just thank you very much. I'm keeping an eye on the time very carefully. I really we're running out. Is there anybody else who's got a question? Yes, there's a hand there. Yeah.
What advice would you give to young artists and illustrators who might be discouraged by the growing use of like AI and generative technology?
I think it's just going to come up.
Sorry.
I think it's right. I think it's right to question that. Sorry, I'm just sort of thinking, what was the last bit of the question? Can you say that again?
What advice would you give to like younger or new artists, new illustrators who might be like discouraged about the use of generative AI like replacing or like?
I think in the context of picture books, I don't see that happening so readily. I think in some other areas of illustration, it's affecting, say for example, some editorial work where you're starting to see things that are shown online that don't have a creator assigned to it, and they're just made by, say, the magazine or the publisher that obviously gone into AI and created that. I think with, well, I know from speaking to art directors, the publishers that I work on, they're very mindful of their standpoint and where they want to place themselves in terms of AI, and it's certainly not with sort of throwing their illustrators under the bus. Nobody knows what's going to happen in the future, but certainly people want authentic picture book experiences where you're talking about real things, real life, because, you know, the audience for that is, you know, young children who are just finding out about the world for the first time. So what we were finding out about the big world, it's all about finding about your real circumstances and the people and the objects and places within it in this world.
Take heart. It's a proper shit. Really, totally. It has. I can understand that if you're an emerging illustrator right now, it's looking really pretty grim out there, but it cannot replace a human hand. The work of our hands is golden. What is coming out of generative AI is, it's a stochastic parrot. It doesn't know what it's doing. It has no humanity, no heart. It has pretty good technique, but no understanding. And it's the understanding and the life that the artist has lived that goes into every single brushstroke, every single mark of the pencil, every single pull of we call it in painting. I should know this stuff, but that is irreplaceable. So really, just take heart. It will be okay.
It's a positive note, that definition. And yeah, so just to conclude, please do go and have a look at the exhibition. As I said, it's books on the top are the books that people chose from their youth. Then you have the artwork, and then you have examples of current books at the bottom. But before you all rush out to go and have a look, can I just thank Sara and Debi so much for being here, and
And